Sometimes they are so smart. They put a known source as the source. They say, oh, this is from The Economist. If you know The Economist, you can recognize The Economist style. Okay, only media people or editors will recognize that. But at least the next step you can take if you're still doubtful is log in to The Economist and search for this item that you saw. Then you can read the original Economist report if there was one. If you can't find any on The Economist, then it's a fake attribution. So you can check the source, then you can check a source that seems to be credible by going to the source directly.
Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and video show which brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon. I'm your host, Frits Bussemaker, and today I'm delighted and privileged to have a conversation with Cyril Pereira. Cyril, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Fritz. Good to be on the show.
Cyril is a media professional, originally from Malaysia, but now based out of Hong Kong for over 35 years. He coaches data journalism for insights into society and policy review. Now, before that, he was the publisher of Asia Magazine, senior executive with the South China Morning Post, and on the board of the Bangkok Post, and also an unprecedented fourth-term chairman of the Society of Publishers in Asia, which brings together all the global brands in media which have a focus on Asia. So again, Cyril, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So you are very much a hardcore media person.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a burden I carry.
Yeah. Now, what we're going to talk about, the future of news, the future of newspapers. Is there a future? Is this a dying industry, or is it still alive and kicking?
I would say that what it used to be is dying. What it is transforming into is actually quite dynamic and alive. And by that, I mean the smart publishers and editors, after initially resisting change, embraced it. And some of the best examples are the New York Times and the Financial Times, who have become multimedia organizations without, and this is important, without compromising the integrity of content.
Okay, so let me stop there for a minute, but just to bring the audience up to speed. When you say how it used to be, can you describe briefly what that classic media is?
Traditional media was a 24-hour cycle gap. They publish at night, and then they don't publish again until the next morning.
Okay.
So it's a 24-hour gap of information, and then a hard copy print which carries what happened more than 24 hours ago.
Yeah, got it.
That was the traditional news.
And now it's multimedia.
Well, even before this happened, basically the internet and social media removed the news asset of newspapers. They were no longer news. They lost news because news is 24/7. It's not the day before. It's as it happens. And that's where newspapers lost its only asset of news.
Mm-hmm.
They had to find new value.
Got it. So 24 and yesterday's news is no news anymore, and that's what newspapers did. So they really needed to change their game.
Those that have succeeded have learned that the news is known, the significance of the news to the citizen is what they should be addressing. Value add. What is the value add to the news the reader already knows?
Okay. Now, in my introduction, I mentioned you coach data journalism. Please give us a definition of what data journalism is and why is it relevant.
I introduced it in 2015 to the China Daily Hong Kong edition, mainly because Hong Kong, as you know, at that time, until very recently, was a very free media environment, and it had newspapers that spanned extreme left to extreme right and a cluster in the center. So you get slanted perspectives on both extremes, where in a city undergoing traumatic political change, this became a big problem. And China Daily was having some challenge to be relevant in Hong Kong. And so I suggested to the publisher that, look, Hong Kong as a city, like any other city in the world, faces a lot of issues that the local administration must resolve, which has nothing to do with political ideology at all. Things like we buy water from southern China at huge expense. We pay a huge premium for that water, but our aging water distribution system through the city wastes 20% of it through leakages and bad maintenance, whether you're left, right, center, or anything. We have a rapidly aging population. Our buildings are not designed for the handicapped or people with wheelchairs. We don't have enough hospital-trained personnel to deal with the problems of the aging, which are quite unique. Again, that doesn't need, so like that, I said, look, why don't you focus on the problems, day-to-day, everyday problems of the people who have to live in this city, which are not being resolved, not because we don't have the money. Hong Kong is one of the few places with a huge surplus income for government, but we don't have the focus from the governance of Hong Kong. They're all distracted with the political noise. They can't see the day-to-day issues. So every month, I said, let's do what I call data journalism in this context, which is totally fact-based. The data is taken from government data and public data, and then extracted for what you need for your purpose. But it is not opinionated. These are the facts. These are the 5-year trends of this particular issue. And these are what the experts, the stakeholders around this topic, whether it's water or public health or pollution, these are what the experts say should be done. And this is what the government has tried doing, but has not been successful. Where are the policy gaps? So the data journalism we do defines the topic, shows the data, and very importantly, uses excellent graphics to communicate quickly what the issue is, and brings in the expert perspectives and the stakeholders so that policymakers have one reference in which they get all perspectives. That's a service.
Okay. But aren't you to some extent still having an opinion if you determine as a newspaper which topics I'm going to cover and which not? If you as a newspaper decide I'm not going to cover
actually, yeah, because we have 12 issues a month, maximum in a year. We've now covered 48, nearly 50 topics, and it doesn't seem to be an end to it because, waste disposal, plastics disposal, harvesting rainwater. I mean, when you start getting into it, there doesn't seem to be you're not exhausting the issues. So we are not short of subjects. And as long as it has to do with the well-being of Hong Kong residents and is nothing to do with political ideology, we cover it.
Got it. And how does the readers react to this shift? Do they recognize it, that it's being done?
Actually, the target for the data journalism being done are the policymakers, not necessarily the mass audience.
Okay.
The policymakers in the Legislative Council, the civil service, the university scholars, the political parties. So they all recognize that is a problem that hasn't been solved, but no one seems to know what to do about it. They say, oh, we've approved budget. We have passed the regulation or whatever. And then that's the end of it. There is no follow-up. There is no review. There is no, why is it not solved? So we are prompting these questions of the people responsible. So they are our target. In order to do that as a follow-up, what we also do, every year we publish what we call collections. So all the data journalism issues of the year are then reprinted into a book as a collection of topics and distributed to the same policymakers. So that's how we close the loop from that.
Okay. Now let me ask you a question which might be seen as cynical, but you've probably heard about the verb.
Journalism is about being cynical.
Great. Good. Okay. So I'm in your corner now. You've obviously heard of word lies, damn lies, and statistics. To what extent can the data you use be manipulated that still you unconsciously are going to be manipulated to present a picture based on data given to you, which might not be the truth? So how do you check the data?
We are not requesting any single source for the data. We are finding the data ourselves.
Okay.
Which was data that was prepared for some other purpose. Mostly routine administrative data. They keep records and they keep records and they keep records of whatever it is they're responsible for. So it is not as if we go to Mr. A or Mr. B and say, can you tell us what you have in data on this subject? No, we find it from multiple sources and we can, and the other thing we do is we compare the data for Hong Kong with similar data for Singapore or London or Paris or Amsterdam to make comparisons, how other cities are dealing with it. So it's both internal data, examining what's happening in Hong Kong, and comparative data with similar cities elsewhere.
Now, is this for you the solution, the approach for modern journalism, data journalism, or are there additional other things papers can do, brands can do to remain relevant?
I would think that ideological propaganda is as furious as ever, whether in print or online. In fact, it's more online now than it's in print. And the average citizen is having a tsunami of it. There is no shortage, there is an overabundance, and a lot of it is rubbish. It's not objective.
Are you talking about all the social media out there, which is perceived to be news?
Social media is a blessing for families keeping in touch with each other, and children abroad and at university and all. It's a curse for society as a whole because of the growing abuse of it, the trolls and paid fake news promoters and stuff. It's a curse. I mean, it's and now what is even worse, the fake news trolls are employing journalists who have been trained in how to write in a credible way to make fake news pretend to be authentic. And
So-
that's an even greater difficulty for the average citizen to distinguish. I mean, just today, I was sent, or in one of the groups that I was sent what sounded and read like real stuff, that the Ministry of Health in Singapore has done an autopsy on a COVID death person, and having cut this man up on the table, they found blood clots in all his veins everywhere. And it's nothing to do with a virus, it's a bacteria-caused blood clot problem, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then I was reading this and I said, then I immediately searched for what is the source, where is the source, where is it coming from? And right at the bottom, it says Ministry of Health, Singapore. And immediately I knew it was fake, because the language of the Singapore government is definitely not this, it is not their style. So I immediately replied to my group, stop sharing, this is fake news. The Ministry of Health in Singapore doesn't talk like this or send any communication like this. Cut it out. But then how many people can make that deduction? The average person cannot.
So this, then I have to ask you the question, indeed, with your 35 years experience, you can recognize it to be fake news. How can you coach, help the general public to start to recognize it as well for those really seeking?
Okay, there are some simple basic steps that the average person can take. When you receive something that sounds either too good to be true or too outrageous to be true, first of all, check the source. Immediately check the source. What is the source? And if the source is something you haven't heard of, it's a link that you've never seen before, you can almost say it's 100% fake. You can dismiss it. You don't need to investigate it further. Now, if the fraud, sometimes they are so smart, they put a known source as the source.
Mm-hmm.
They say, oh, this is from The Economist. If you know The Economist, you can recognize The Economist style. Okay, only media people or editors will recognize that. But at least the next step you can take, if you're still doubtful, is log in to The Economist and search for this item that you saw. Then you can read the original Economist report, if there was one. If you can't find any on The Economist, then it's a fake attribution. So you can check the source, then you can check a source that seems to be credible by going to the source directly. That's the next thing you should do. And the third thing is, if it is a news item that should concern the public as a whole, check why is it not on any of the major platforms. If it is not also on any of the major platforms, something is fishy about it. So you can check Reuters, you can check Bloomberg, you can check CNN, you can check BBC. If that item is not top of news on those platforms, chances are it was invented.
I think that's very sound, good advice, although it does look like a lot of average for the average reader, recipient of news.
Yeah, they don't want to make the effort, and they hit the button to send, to share, to because it's sensational.
Yes.
Yeah.
Although I do see a growing trend where news media are now covering each other and to make comments on other media outlets about the news they're providing, to what extent it's biased or truthful or not.
I think
that's being done for us.
It's good that news media themselves are beginning to verify what other media are publishing. It's a good check and balance within the industry for consumers. But then there's a lot more beyond that that's going on social media. That as I said, it's like a tsunami. I mean, how does the average social media victim deal with it?
Now, in your opinion, who should be the organizations and stakeholders to make certain that we still have that, I would say, part that institution is part of our global system? Is one of the elements of being a democracy. You have to have independent news.
Yeah.
Who should we?
What's the question? You had a question.
Yeah.
No, what's the question?
Oh, I was just wondering the fact that what you're observing, the struggle of news, the transformation to multimedia, data-driven news, the fact that news are now covering other newspapers as well, for the benefit of the public, to help distinguish between what's fact and what's an alternative truth, for lack of better words. Are there institutions we can call upon to help keep that news as trustworthy as possible?
We don't yet have much activity in terms of independent verification and independent fake news checks. The US is very, very, very dynamic on this. The Knight Foundation, Pew, and Columbia, and places like that have taken proactive steps to institutionalize fake news verification, that a consumer can go into their website and put the item on and say, is this, and then you get a response back if it's fake or not. But that has not yet become a global resource, and it is still very much limited to the English language. I believe Germany has got some development in the German language for German content. But apart from English language in the USA, I think Reuters has something too in terms of fact checking, but it hasn't yet become a kind of global consumer resource. I believe your organization could contribute something in terms of content verification and in terms of AI to work in this area. It's difficult. We still need the human judgment in gray areas. We need the human judgment. AI helps maybe 80% of the way. A combination of AI and final human judgment may work, but perhaps we should encourage governments, but they are the biggest offenders in fake news to start with. But maybe we should encourage governments, or parliaments at least, to consider institutionalizing fake news verification for the country and for its citizens.
Wow, that's quite a big challenge you're describing. If we really have to address governments on the globe, where do you draw your inspiration from? What makes you, what drives you to still put effort in this?
I believe that there is always a pendulum in global affairs. The pendulum now has swung so far to this pandemic of fake news that I think more and more citizens are getting fed up of it. They're getting tired of it. They're saturated with it. And the mood is now turning towards embracing more credible, trusted brands and sources.
Okay. But I was wondering about your personal role in this whole situation. What do you want to contribute to that, what we're observing right now?
Well, I must say that the work so far done, which is quite considerable on the China Daily archives in the data site that anybody clicking in can go to the data part of the website, and issues of topical importance to every country. It's, while it may be specifically looking at Hong Kong, the issues are everywhere. It's common issues. And I have had interest here in Kuala Lumpur. People asking me, how can we replicate such kind of journalism here? And I think similarly, the model can be used in every city in the world by a set of journalists oriented to that, to create new value in content and information, and supply it to all the newspapers.
Okay, just out of curiosity, you've mentioned a couple of times it can apply to different cities around the world.
Yeah.
Hong Kong is a city, so I can understand that. But would it also apply for governments as a whole, nations as a whole, or is city something specific?
Cities have specific issues around cities, which are also covering or overlapping issues of countries. Like, for example, public health care is a national issue. Pollution is a national issue. Plastic waste is a national issue. Aging population is a national issue. So I don't see the model as it applies to Hong Kong being unable to be extended to cover the country.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, in all your years as a journalist working in the international media industry, what are your biggest learnings and failures to date?
Be careful in choosing your boss. You have to be as critical in employing your boss, employing, I'm using inverted commas, as it is when you interview a subordinate, potential subordinate. Because your boss has so much power, corporate power, administrative power, bureaucratic power, that if he isn't a good leader, you become a victim. And my motto, having worked in Kuala Lumpur, in Singapore, and in Hong Kong, is life is too short to waste it under a lousy boss. So you've got to fire your boss. Meaning you leave. You can't afford to waste time. And you got to find somebody under whom you can develop and convert your potential, because he supports you, he wants you to develop. So in the same way, that for me is the biggest learning, that don't hang around. If you've got a guy who's going to be there for another 3 or 5 years and he's rotten to the core, don't waste time. That's the biggest learning. And I have had several switches of careers precisely for that, where I just come in and announce I'm resigning. I don't have a job in hand. I'm just walking out. That's it. I've had enough. I'm gone. I've been lucky, of course, that I've found appropriate counter employment. And the other thing that I learned, the life learning, is until you get out of your comfort zone, you really do not know what is out there that is good for you and you good for them. For example, when I first went to Hong Kong, when I told my boss and I told my colleagues in Kuala Lumpur and in Singapore that, I'm going to Hong Kong, the reaction was one of shock, truly shocked. Then people were calling me up as though I'm going to an execution. And they were commiserating with me, saying, I heard you're going to Hong Kong. Wow. That's really going to be tough. And you don't speak Chinese. You're not Chinese. It's a totally Chinese city. And Hong Kong, you've seen it on TV. They're all gangsters. They're all killers. They're all triads. And you're going into this environment and you don't speak a word of it, and you're not Chinese. Oh my God. How are you going to survive? So everybody came to me saying that was the worst decision you could have ever made. And I never thought about that. I truly never even considered it. I just said, hey, here's Hong Kong. Let's go and see what's going on there. It's such a dynamic city and so on. But when I went to Hong Kong, the biggest success of my life is Hong Kong. I was in so many government advisory boards. I was in industry boards. I was chairman of Society of Publishers. I was operations director of the South China Morning Post, one of the best English language newspapers in Asia. And I was an outsider, complete outsider, not an insider at all. So getting out of your comfort zone, if you believe in yourself, is vital. You must get out of your comfort zone because you don't know what's out there. And I'm just looking back in horror at what I would have missed if I didn't come to Hong Kong. If I haven't spent 35 years of my life in Hong Kong, what I have missed. I would have missed the whole world, adventure and networking and global.
Also, you've definitely proven the people wrong that indeed in those 35 years you've been quite successful in the international media industry. So I want to thank you very much for sharing your insights in, personal insights in fire your boss if it's no good fit. One thing I've also learned.
It's not a joke. It's not a joke. Right?
Yeah, definitely not. Just throw yourself into the deep end and great things will come. And from the media perspective, media is changing. It's moving into a multimedia platform, and that the whole data-driven journalism can help society maintain to present real fact-based news. And thank you also for sharing your insights in how we can recognize what's fake news and what's not fake news. And hopefully we can help maintain a democratic system in this world. So Cyril, thank you so much for sharing your insights with The Brand Called You.
Thank you, Fritz.
Okay. Hey, we'll talk soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to The Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.